You think modern neuroscience has cracked consciousness? In April 2025, the largest experiment in the history of consciousness research published its final results in Nature. The two leading theories of consciousness went head-to-head. For the first time ever in a fair fight, both partially failed. We still don't know what consciousness is, and the man who bet 25 years ago that we'd know by now, he just paid up. In Portuguese wine. April 1998, Tucson, Arizona. A neuroscientist and a philosopher walk into a bar. It sounds like the start of a joke. But that night ended with one of the most famous scientific bets of the last 30 years. The neuroscientist was Christof Koch, Caltech, former collaborator of Francis Crick, the same Crick who co-discovered DNA. Koch had spent decades hunting for what he called the neural correlates of consciousness. He believed if you found the right pattern of brain activity, you'd find the seat of consciousness itself. The philosopher was David Chalmers, Australian. He had just 3 years earlier coined the most famous phrase in modern philosophy of mind: the hard problem of consciousness. Anda. Easy problems. How the brain processes signals, how memory works, how attention shifts. Those are hard, but they're solvable. We chip away at them. The hard problem is different. Why does any of it feel like something? Why is there a redness to red? A pain to pain? A what it's like to being you right now watching this? Chalmers said, science can answer the easy problems. But the hard problem might be unanswerable by science alone. Consciousness might be fundamental. Like space, time, mass. Koch disagreed, strongly. So at that bar in 1998, they made a bet. Koch said, by 2023, 25 years from now, we'll have found a clear neural signature of consciousness. A specific pattern in the brain that means this person is conscious. Chalmers said, I bet you won't. The wager, a case of fine wine. They wrote it down on a napkin. Both signed. Then they had another drink. For the bet to resolve, you needed a theory of consciousness to test. By 2018, 2 theories dominated the field. Theory 1, Integrated Information Theory, IIT for short. Created in 2004 by Giulio Tononi at the University of Wisconsin. IIT says consciousness is integrated information. The more a system can integrate information into a unified whole, into something more than the sum of its parts, the more conscious it is. Tononi calls this quantity phi. A small phi means a little consciousness. A large phi means a lot of consciousness. A large phi means a lot. The implication is wild. A thermostat? Tiny phi. Tiny consciousness. A brain? Massive phi? Massive consciousness? AI? It depends on the architecture. This is panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is everywhere, in everything in different amounts. To IIT, the question isn't, is this conscious? The question is, how much consciousness does it have? Tononi predicted, the seat of consciousness is in the posterior cortex, the back of the brain, specifically sustained synchronized activity there. Theory 2, Global Neuronal Workspace Theory, GNWT, created in 2001 by Stanislas Dehaene in France, building on earlier work by Bernard Bars. GNWT says, consciousness is integrated. Information. The more a system can integrate information into a unified whole, into something more than the sum of its parts, the more conscious it is. Tononi calls this quantity phi. A small phi means a little consciousness. A large phi means a lot. The implication is wild. A thermostat, tiny phi, tiny consciousness. A brain, Massive phi. Massive consciousness. AI. It depends on the architecture. This is panpsychism. The idea that consciousness is everywhere, in everything, in different amounts. To IIT, the question isn't, is this consciousness? The question is, how much consciousness does it have? Tononi predicted. The seed of In 2018, Templeton World Charity Foundation announced something audacious. They would fund, to the tune of over $20 million, the first ever adversarial collaboration in neuroscience. The idea: take the two leading theories of consciousness, make their proponents, Tononi for IIT, Dehaene for GNWT, sit in the same room. Force them to commit, in writing, to specific predictions about what their theory says will happen in a brain scanner. Then run the experiment with theory-neutral methodology. If the data match IIT predictions, IIT wins. If they match GNWT, GNWT wins. If neither, back to the drawing board. The consortium called itself Cogitate. Lucia Meloni at Max Planck and Michael Pitts at Reed College led the design. Christof Koch, the same Koch from the wine bet, joined as a neutral host. 12 research institutions, 3 continents, 256 human participants, 3 different brain scanning technologies running simultaneously. fMRI for spatial precision, MEG for time precision, IEE. Actual electrodes on living human cortex during epilepsy surgery for both. The experiment was elegantly simple. Show subjects visual stimuli, faces, objects, geometric shapes, for varying durations. Some stimuli were consciously perceived. Some were too brief to consciously register. For each stimulus, where in the brain does activity light up, when and how long? IIT predicted sustained synchronized activity in the posterior cortex, lasting as long as the stimulus is conscious. GNWT predicted ignition in the prefrontal cortex when the stimulus first becomes conscious, and another ignition when it disappears from consciousness. Different predictions, different brain regions, different time signatures. The data would speak. For 7 years, the data slowly came in. June 23, 2023. New York City, annual meeting of the Association for the Scientific Study of Consciousness. Christof Koch walked onto the stage. He was 67. 25 years had passed since that desert evening in Tucson. His career had spanned the entire arc of modern consciousness research. He had collaborated with Francis Crick. He had run the Allen Institute for Brain Science. He had written best-selling books arguing that consciousness was about to be solved. In his hand, he held a wooden case of fine Portuguese wine. He looked at David Chalmers, the philosopher who had told him, 25 years ago, that the hard problem was harder than he thought. Koch spoke into the microphone. David, I lost the bet. Cogitate just announced its initial results. Neither IIT nor GNWT cleanly explains the data. We have not found the neural signature of consciousness. Not yet. He handed Chalmers the wine. The audience applauded. Some scientists in the room cried, not from sadness, from the weight of it, from watching one of the most famous men in their field publicly admit defeat on something they had all spent their lives chasing. Chalmers smiled. Dryly, I told you it would take longer. Then Koch did something nobody expected. He proposed another bet. By 2048, 25 more years from now, we will find the neural signature. Chalmers laughed. Took the bet anyway. Koch is 67. By 2048, he'll be 92. 3 months after the wine handoff, The consciousness science community went into civil war. September 15, 2023, a letter appeared on ScienceLore, signed by 124 scientists. The title was diplomatic. The content was nuclear. It called Tononi's Theory, Integrated Information Theory, Pseudoscience. Pseudoscience, the same word used for astrology, homeopathy, flat earth. The letter argued that IIT's commitment to panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is fundamental and ubiquitous, and its mathematical claims that can't easily be falsified, made it not real science. The signatories included Anil Seth at the University of Sussex, Hakwan Lau at UCLA, Joseph Ledoux at NYU. Big names, respected names. Tononi was furious. He defended IIT publicly. He said the letter was political, an attempt to discredit a theory because it was uncomfortable, not because it was wrong. Other consciousness researchers tried to mediate. Anil Seth himself, 18 months later, wrote a Nautilus magazine essay saying, "Even if IIT is wrong, that doesn't make it pseudoscience. We shouldn't call theories pseudoscience just because they're hard to test." The Twitter feeds of consciousness researchers became unreadable. Accusations, counter-accusations, mass blocks. Senior scientists who had been collegial for decades stopped speaking. Stroprady, the field that was supposed to be solving consciousness, couldn't even agree on what counted as legitimate science. And in the middle of all this, on April 30th, 2025, the Cogitate Consortium published its final paper in Nature. The paper was honest. It said exactly what the data said. For IIT, Tononi predicted sustained synchronization in the posterior cortex, while subjects were conscious of a stimulus. The data showed initial synchronization, but not sustained, not for the duration of conscious experience. The core IIT prediction failed. For GNWT, Dehaene predicted prefrontal ignition, both at stimulus onset and offset. The data showed ignition at onset, but not at offset. And the prefrontal representation of conscious dimensions was much weaker than GNWT had predicted. The paper concluded, and I quote, "Results align with some predictions of IIT and GNWT while substantially challenging key tenets of both theories. In English, both theories partially failed." Tononi gave a statement. Calm, professional. He said, "The data refine where integrated information lives in the brain. We need to update the theory, not abandon it." Dehaene gave a similar statement. Some workspace predictions held, some didn't. Science is about updating. Both men were polite. Neither was wrong to try to save their theory. Both have decades of work invested. But the empirical fact stands. After 25 years, over $20 million, 256 participants, 3 brain scanning technologies, 12 institutions, 3 continents, 7 years of pre-registered experiments. We know more about the brain than we did in 1998. But we are not, by a long shot, close to a neural signature of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness, named by David Chalmers in 1995, lives up to its name. Here's what fascinates me about this story. Christof Koch could have weaseled out. He could have argued the bet was vague. He could have nitpicked what counted as a clear neural signature. He could have moved goalposts. He did the opposite. He bought the wine. He handed it over publicly. He said the words, "I lost. We have not found it." Then he immediately bet another 25 years. That's what science is supposed to look like. Not certainty. Not winning. Honest. Losing. And immediately trying again. Most of us don't do this. In our lives, in our careers, in our beliefs, when we're proven wrong, we hedge. We minimize. We change the subject. Koch, at 67, with his career legacy at stake, bought the wine. Now look at where we are. The two leading theories of consciousness partially failed. The field is in civil war over what counts as science. We don't know what consciousness is. We don't know how much your brain has of it. We don't know if your AI has any. We don't know what's happening in your brain. Right now, that makes this video feel like something to watch. That's the unsettled question of the 21st century. And in 2048, when Christof Koch is 92, we might still be asking it. Maybe the strangest thing about consciousness is it might be the one mystery that keeps the next mystery alive. While Koch and Chalmers wait another 25 years for an answer, biology is busy producing weirder questions. Imagine a parasite that crawls into a snail, hijacks its brain, and forces it to climb to the top of a leaf, so a bird will eat the snail and let the parasite reproduce. Imagine the snail thinking it's just walking. Imagine you can't tell from the inside if your brain is even yours. That's not science fiction. That's a real fungus. Cordyceps, the zombie ant fungus, real biology, real animals. And it raises a question consciousness research can't even start to ask. Are you sure your decisions are yours?